Hey everyone, welcome back. This is devotional number 4 on peace during this Christmas season. And this time around, I want to talk a little bit about what it means to choose that peace that Jesus gives. So we've already talked about the fact that Jesus desires to give peace and that he has an unlimited storehouse of peace to draw from, that he is the owner of all true peace. And so he can give it out as a gift to anybody who's willing to receive it. But what does it actually mean to receive it, and how do we hold on to it? In these situations, in these days, it's quite easy for situations to come and go, and they have either a small impact on the way we think or the way we feel. In other cases, they have a large impact on the way we think and feel. For example, you may go to the doctor and discover that you have a physical issue that's brewing or getting worse, or something that maybe you thought was something small that turns out to be something bigger. Well, that would be a big situation where your sense of peace can actually be pretty dramatically impacted in that moment. Or you may go to the store and forget your wallet, and it's a mild inconvenience, a tiny little frustration in the middle of your day, but it doesn't have a huge consequence, but still something that can be a factor in whether or not we can experience and continue to walk in that sense of peace, this internal peace that Jesus gives. So I think there's a couple of things that are important in order to hold on to that peace and to receive it. First, obviously, receiving. We have to position ourselves to receive the good things that God desires to give, and I'd like to say that it's automatic, and in some ways it is, because God is gracious and He's kind, and He shows a lot of these things every day, whether we're aware of them or not. But there are some things He leaves on our end in order to manage, and one of those is posturing ourselves to receive. And one of the most natural barriers in the idea of receiving the peace that Jesus gives is a sense of worthiness. That maybe somehow, if we don't clean up our act or get ourselves together or conquer sin or anger or some sort of negative thing like that in our lives, that God wouldn't actually give us that peace, that we got to sort of qualify first. And Jesus doesn't have anything in His words about qualifying for peace. He just simply said to His disciples, my peace I give to you. I do not give as the world gives. In that sense, Jesus is saying, I do not give with conditions. I do not give with a standard where you need to qualify in order to receive that peace. So you can receive peace no matter where you are. You could be in the middle of a frustrated season, in the middle of anxious thoughts, even in the middle of a depression or a broken relationship. We can receive peace no matter where we are. And it has nothing to do with our worthiness, and has everything to do with God's willingness. The second piece that's super important about posturing or positioning ourselves to receive that peace is to make sure that we are ready to hold on to it. It's not a worthiness thing, but we have to be prepared that when we receive peace, that there's responsibility on our end to hold on to it, in order to keep it, to contend for it, to preserve it, and this takes some effort on our part. Again, not an effort to earn, but it takes intentionality and effort to hold on to that peace that can actually escape very quickly if we're not careful, because of circumstances that we face, because of world stuff, personal stuff, internal stuff, relationship stuff, and on that list goes of things that can rob us of our peace. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5, Paul has this to say. He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought and make it obedient to Christ. I mean, he's kind of talking a little bit about the idea of the gospel and what is true and holding on to what is true, and that there's ideas and things out there that are false. And we have to have a discerning heart. We have to have a mind of wisdom to figure out what are the ideas that are worth believing and holding on to, and those come from Jesus, and what are the ideas and thoughts that are not worth holding on to that would actually rob us of our peace or steer us down the wrong path. Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 talks about the renewing of the mind, that as we offer ourselves as a living sacrifice, that we give God room to help us renew our mind. And one of the ideas of renewing our mind is simply to take what is true, to take what is right, and allow those things to become our anchor when our circumstances or our feelings want to push us in a different direction. So for example, when we heard about the new lockdown restrictions here in Alberta, I know every province is kind of different. When we heard about the new restrictions, again, it was cause for a level of frustration, a level of internal response. This is not what we want. This is not what any of us would desire. I mean, personally, I love being with people, and the social gathering restrictions are very difficult. And so there's an internal sadness, there's an internal grief and frustration that things aren't what they could or should be. But when that feeling comes, and we all have kind of our own different way of responding to that situation and many others, but when that feeling comes, that frustration, that anxiousness, that agitation, that sense that something isn't right, maybe a sense of injustice, or maybe even a feeling that freedoms are being infringed upon, and there's this tension between what government could and should do and shouldn't do. And I'm not here to tell you what they should or shouldn't do. That's not our responsibility. But when that feeling comes, we have a responsibility before Jesus to take the thoughts that come and to line them up with what is true. So even though it's not what we want it to be today, Jesus is not nervous, and he is still with us. He's not limited by social gathering restrictions. And that's something to be thankful for. That God is not held at a distance, even though our daily lives are pretty impacted by these new measures for COVID-19. So the idea of taking every thought captive is simply to take the thoughts that come into mind and the feelings that kind of rise up in our heart, and then to carefully look at them. So if you're frustrated, then it's a good thing to ask the question, why exactly am I frustrated? We tend to want to just let our feelings carry on to their natural conclusion. I feel what I feel, and I just need to sort of get it out. I think that's true. It's better than burying those feelings. But I think a far better option is to add a second half, a healthy half. We need to process those feelings, but then we need to move beyond the feelings and either steer them or abandon them for what is true. If we can steer our emotions towards what is true, then we have a hope of recentering and positioning ourselves to receive and live in that peace. This is why the Psalms in the Bible are super, super helpful. If you want a clear look at what it means to express your heart in prayer before God, just read some of the Psalms. They are so powerfully honest, and honest to the point where through our own Western eyes we would read them and we'd go, "Ooh, that's pretty dramatic," or that's a pretty severe thought or statement that the psalmist is making. God, that you would take my enemies and dash them upon the rocks, that you would cut them off from the land of the living, that you would deal with them harshly and severely. Now, I mean, in those days, enemies were literal enemies who would want to kill you or dethrone you, and so there was some realities there, that it wasn't just a bad driver that you encounter that makes you frustrated. I mean, they were pretty intense situations, but still, the heart cry of being real in front of God, super important to renewing the mind and taking our thoughts captive. We can't take a thought captive unless we're first willing to admit what that thought is. We can't wrestle down that feeling unless we actually admit and identify what that feeling is. We may be feeling anger about things in the world around us, with political or economical or COVID-19, kind of you name it. We may feel frustration, but underneath that, there's usually something else that's kind of driving that feeling of frustration or angst. It could be a fear of change. What happens if this is permanent? What happens if this is the reality we have to live with for longer than the next 2 or 3 or 4 months, or 3 weeks, or even 2 days, kind of depending on who you are and where you're at right now. So there could be other things underneath those initial feelings and those initial thoughts. So if we can pause. Now, I'm actually recommending a literal pause. When you feel the frustration or the angst or the fear or whatever it might be, when you've experienced that feeling that wants to rob you of your peace, or when that thought comes that you know is going to cause some of that response, it really is a good idea to literally pause and go, what is it that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm thinking? Make it specific, label it, write it down if you have to, because these thoughts and feelings kind of come and go. But if we want to wrestle them down and experience peace, we've got to identify what they are. Then we can be steered towards truth. So here's the second part of a lot of those Psalms that we read. In the beginning, it's this cry to God about how the psalmist really feels about life or what's going on in that moment. And it's real and it's honest and it's fresh, and it doesn't actually even care or matter whether the thought itself is right or wrong. It needs to be expressed. But then, inevitably, the psalm shifts, and the psalmist will write something like this: "Yet even in the middle of these things, I know you are with me." Or, "I will always trust you because your love is unfailing." Or, "Even if the mountains should crumble and the seas dry up, I know that you will stay with me because you are faithful to your promises." I mean, these are what it means to take the thoughts and the feelings that go along with them and to wrestle them down, to allow them room to be expressed, but then to be steered towards a God who is filled with love and compassion, a God who is in control, a God who is faithful to the things he has promised. So this is hopefully a helpful piece on what it means to position ourselves to receive that peace. So my encouragement and my challenge for you today is just simply to take a moment and do a catalog or do a list, but not a grocery list, and actually a feeling list or a thought list. Just sit down with a pad and a pencil or a notebook, whatever it is that you would normally write something down on, and just think about the last few days. What have been some of the emotions that have come up the most? What have been some of the thoughts that have surfaced most frequently? And use that as a starting point and ask questions like, what's underneath that thought? What's underneath that feeling? And you'll start to identify what it really is that's going on at a deeper level, those things that are really interfering and wrestling and vying for your heart's attention. And when you dial in with some of those things, then literally you can pray this out loud. Jesus, you understand that I am actually feeling like this, once you've realized what's really going on. Or that my thoughts have to do with fear, or have to do with frustration, or not being able to connect, whatever the situation is. When you've got that identified, you lay it at Jesus' feet. You say, Jesus, I give you my anxious thoughts. I'm not in control of this situation, but I trust that you are. And you've told me that you are good. Your word says you are good. So I'm choosing to trust that. Now please come and fill me with your peace. And then hold on to that peace simply by continuing to catalog and wrestle through those feelings and those thoughts that surface. They tell you a lot about who you are. They tell you a lot about what drives you and what's really important to you, and how some of those values need to be reshaped. Some of them are solid and excellent, but others may need to be reshaped and redirected towards Jesus. So that's one piece on how to posture yourselves to receive Jesus' peace and how to hold on to it when you have it. Let me pray for you, and we'll see you again in the next video. Jesus, thank you that you desire to show us how we are made and how we are wired, and how a lot of our experiences and a lot of our thoughts and a lot of our emotions are in some ways culturally trained into us. And in other ways, they are a reflection of who we are and the experiences we've already been through. things that we shy away from, the things that we are frustrated about, the things that make us joyful and happy and proud and make us motivated and want to engage. All of these things are just a very complicated mixture of who we are and the families we come from and the things that we've been through. And I thank you, Jesus, that you know each one of us so intimately well, that you know all of those dynamics, the thoughts that we think, the emotions that we feel, and all the things that are going on deep underneath the surface. So I pray for everyone tuning in, and even for myself, Lord, that you would help us to dig a bit deeper, to go beyond the things that are at the surface, to go beyond feelings or thoughts of frustration or anger or confusion. And that you would help us to see what are the things deeper down that are feeding into those thoughts and emotions. That you would meet us in that place, that you would bring healing where it's needed, that you would bring wisdom and clarity when we need to see something. And that you would give us courage to lay it down, because these things run so much deeper than our surface level thoughts and emotions. So steer us and guide us, Lord. Help us to see what they are, to lay them at your feet, and to receive your perfect peace. I pray in your name. Amen. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you again with the 5th video. Take care.